Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host, Khalid. But today is the 12th of June, 2023. We've got lots to discuss with you, so let's begin without further ado. Our first story today concerns Pakistan as well as climate change. We all know about the torrential rains that have battered Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province and also the cyclone Biparjoy that the Pakistan Met Department says is now classified as an extremely severe cyclonic storm. It is around 600 kilometers away from the coastal city. We've also seen the floods that have battered Pakistan last year, and the amount of damage that they gave Pakistan and the economic turmoil that resulted as a consequence of climate change effects, such as those excessive rains that led to those floods. This time again, we are seeing Cyclone Biparjoy, we are seeing excessive rains. What should Pakistan's strategy be? Pakistan has highlighted climate change and Pakistan being one of the most vulnerable countries despite being the least as far as the carbon emitters are concerned. But as a country, what should Pakistan do? How should Pakistan move forward? How should Pakistan also move forward regionally? We'll be discussing that and more in our first segment. Our second story, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the relationship between Pakistan and Russia that has been further cemented in the energy sector by the arrival of the first Russian oil cargo ship that has now docked in Pakistan. The Russian vessel Pure Point, 183 meter long oil tanker carrying 45,000 metric tons of oil, has docked at berth number 2 at the port. And this is what the current government had announced, that they had locked a contract, a deal with the Russian Federation, and as per that deal, now the first cargo ship has arrived with the oil. This is going to further boost Pakistan's economic situation in the form of the oil coming here. And let's see what happens as far as further oil that might come from Russia. Today also marks the Russian Federation's National Day and the 75 years of the relationship between Pakistan and the Russian Federation. So this being another hallmark of that long-standing and fruitful relationship. This is going to be our second segment. Our third segment, ladies and gentlemen, concerns 4 Colombian indigenous children who have been discovered 40 days, ladies and gentlemen, 40 days after their plane crashed in the Amazon jungle. They have survived just by eating seeds, by eating roots, and by eating plants. It's a miracle that these children survived these horrendous 40 days without any help whatsoever. As they say, where there's a will, there is always a way. This is going to be our third story. Let's begin with our first segment, and that concerns climate change, Pakistan, the issues that Pakistan has been confronted with on the climate change front, whether it be through the floods that resulted as due to the excessive rains last year, or this year also, as we've been witnessing excessive rains in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the cyclone Biparjoy. More in the following report.
Pakistan is one of the countries that is going to be most affected by global climate change, as the country is gripped by recurring climate extremes. Highlighting extent of climate change, scorching, drought, aggravating heat wave struck the country, followed by a combination of heavy rainfall and fierce winds. KP's southern district, including Bannu, Lucky Marwat and Karak, have borne the brunt of powerful storms that swept away homes, uprooted trees and electricity pylons, and left hundreds of people stranded. Death toll has risen to at least 27, with 169 injured in recent storms and heavy rainfall in KPK, with Biparjoy continuing to gaining strength after turning into an extremely severe cyclonic storm. The risk of cyclone Biparjoy present in Arabian Sea escalates. Apocalyptic rains and floods that hit Pakistan last summer claimed 1,700 lives, left a swathe of territory the size of Switzerland underwater, and affected 33 million people. Since 1959, Pakistan has announced for 0.4% of historic emissions, and yet it is listed as one of the most climate vulnerable places in the world, according to joint findings by World Bank and Asian Development Bank. A top UN panel of scientists, the Intergovernment Panel on Climate Change, has warned that humanity still has a chance close to lost to prevent the worst climate change's future harms. Wealthier states that have responsibility for climate change must remedy historic injustices and support low-emitting countries like Pakistan to attain climate resilience.
Afia Salam, environmentalist, joins us online. Afia, thank you very much to have joined us. It's always a pleasure to talk to you about climate, about environment, and you're always a wonderful guest to give us different points of views and your analyses as well. So welcome to our show. The death toll, Afia, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa has risen to 27, with 169 injured in the recent storms because of the heavy rainfall. Do you feel that Pakistan will continue to be more vulnerable because of climate change?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that vulnerability, of course, is established, scientifically established as well. It's not just that we are going to play the victim. We've been in the Global Vulnerability Index, the top 10 bracket for over a decade. So that nothing has happened to decrease that vulnerability. The way the vulnerability is measured is also they take the infrastructure of the country, which makes the population vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. So there we know that we have not really done much to improve the infrastructure, which includes the the living spaces of people. And the current damage, just like last year's unfortunate flood damage, was mostly because the houses could not survive the torrential rain. And of course, also because they were in the path of the raging waters. So unfortunately, that has not changed. So the vulnerability remains.
But you talk about the vulnerability that remains, but this time we see more of it in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and last time it was more in the north as well. Should we foresee also events such as Glof, such as other areas getting more vulnerable with time as well? What needs to be the immediate measures to be taken by the locals, by the local governments, and by the government itself, in your point of view now, seeing what is happening in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa as well as the cyclone Biparjoy?
Well, if you sort of just project it to what is happening in our coastal area with the warning of the cyclone, impending cyclone making its landfall in areas, even if not in Pakistan itself, but the periphery of the cyclone, of course, brings in high winds and rains. So there are warnings being sent out. There are evacuation plans afoot. And this time the government has said it's not going to request people to evacuate. It's going to forcibly evacuate them. It is facing resistance from communities. They have their reasons, obviously. But early warning system is something essential for a country which is so vulnerable to natural disasters. And that is something that needs to be fast-tracked. Our Met department does a good job of giving us timely warnings. But then what good are those timely warnings if we can't act on them? So that is one thing. Yes, our north is very vulnerable to Glofs. There's no saying that there won't be. The summer has only just started. And like the past 2 years, the temperatures are really climbing up fast. So this is around the time of the year when we do experience Glofs. We hope we won't, but all indications are that we may. And similarly, downstream, when the pattern, although this time the long-term forecast says that we will receive less monsoon rainfall than last year. But given the climate change, given the rising temperatures, especially over the sea, the frequency and ferocity of the kind of precipitation phenomenon is increasing. So this is something we have no control over. What we must actually get control over is our response to these disasters. Like I mentioned,
you talk about the response. You talk about the early warning system, and you say the Pakistan Met Department is doing a great job of it. But when we talk of evacuating the people, forcefully evacuating the people, in the long run, shouldn't we have a strategy so that we already know where to evacuate people from X, Y, or Z area in case anything happens? We already know the areas that are vulnerable.
Absolutely. So this is the thing. You see, it has to be a two-pronged strategy, short-term and long-term. In the short term, we have to move the people away from those areas where they know that the disaster may strike. But the long-term strategy has to be a vulnerability mapping of the entire country. And then, that's a very difficult task, but it has to be done, that people must not be allowed to go back to the vulnerable areas. But that doesn't mean you just pick them up and throw them somewhere else. Like you said, it has to be planned. Wherever else they are going to be resettled, there are land claims, there are facilities available. Are there near any hospitals? Are there near a road network? Are there going to be livelihood opportunities? Now, that is what the governments are expected to do. That is what they do all over the world. So that needs to be done as well. That's a long-term strategy. But immediate is, of course, early warning and evacuation, plus the rescue network has to be absolutely ready. It has to be proactive, not reactive like in 2022. When the local, we from social media, we got to know, and there were local people who were trying to help to the best of their ability, which was, they don't have those resources or access to resources. So
I
this is
totally agree
now.
with you. I totally agree with you, Afia, on that. But there's another thing with the cyclone Biparjoy. They are saying that there might be widespread rains and very heavy rains for a very short time, but extremely heavy rains around the coastal areas. Now, we all know what the situation in Karachi is. If it rains a little, the water just stagnates there in the streets and everywhere. How should the government, the government there, the provincial government in Sindh, react to this beforehand?
Well, it's unfortunately we don't have the local government, because this is actually the job of the local government. The easiest response or the fastest response always has to be from the local. But we have the local agency, we have the city administration, we've got so many DHAs and cantonment boards, which unfortunately after last year's disaster swung into action pretty late. So right now, the people in supposedly the posh areas are all afraid of being.
They are also most vulnerable because they are the nearest to the coastal areas.
Yes, and the other areas of the city, they also need to be, the urban flooding is not the result just of rain. It is because of management.
I agree with you. Now, speaking of management, the World Bank Group's Country Climate and Development Report for Pakistan that was released last year also said that the country needs fundamental shifts in its development path and policies, which also require substantive developments and investments in people-centric climate adaptation. What should that be in your point of view? What should be the basic contours of this strategy?
Well, it says it all, people-centric means that the things have to benefit the development, which I started spelling as DEVILOPFT. Unfortunately, I'm about to get apply for copyright on that. I've said it before. We don't look at the long-term effects, and also the elite capture. The development funds are developing the already areas which have resources. What about the rest of the people? 60% of cities like Karachi, my city, of Kachi Abadi. So that is where the development focus needs to be. We need good urban transport. We need the sewage. We need the sewage, the open sewers cleaned of all the waste that accumulates over there, that does not allow the water. The storm drains become sewage drains.
Exactly. So we need a proper waste management system for the area as well. All right, Afia, I'd also like to understand, in the latest report, that is Climate Change 2023 synthesis report, the IPCC, otherwise known as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, gives its final warning. It says that the emissions curve is not bending yet. What would be the implications for Pakistan?
Oh, the implications, not just for Pakistan, for most of the countries, global south, and across the world. So you look what is happening. We've had storms in the countries, the first world countries as well. We've had those raging fires, and now it has hit home closer to them, the impacts of climate change and how far reaching they are, and they need to take action. But despite all the progress, very slow progress that has been made, unless and until we can limit the temperature of the earth from rising, which the IPCC report says is going to
1.5 degrees.
It is going to breach. All the scientists have already been saying that, they had been saying that unless this is done, due to extinction, species extinction, we are also now, going to breach the 1.5. And when that happens, all the doom and gloom scenarios that they had warned us of, we have to they will be playing out. The coastal, ingress by the sea because of the sea level rise, the melting of the glaciers, the frequency of the storms, the ferocity of the storms, which are actually being generated by, the rising temperatures.
But we have countries such as the Maldives that are also sinking slowly and steadily. We have this is a global phenomenon, climate change, that is having repercussions across the world. But unfortunately, Afia, with the due respect, a lot of countries in the global north do not either understand the repercussions or do not want to understand the repercussions, and that is why, despite COP26, COP27, the pledges made, where are those pledges translating into actions? Why is that not happening?
So it's a slow process. Like I said, it's too slow. If you see, it doesn't match with the urgency or the warnings that are being sounded, and that is something that that needs to be impressed now at the coming COP. Because it's very well to say that okay, there's going to be a financial mechanism. If you get damaged, we may be able to compensate you, but that will not stop the damage. So I mean, it's like a bucket with a hole. You keep pouring water into it, and that's not going to stop leaking. So the emissions cut conversation needs to really now raise the decibels, because without that, there's no point in just asking for money to deal with the damage. That money does not cover the damage. The lives lost will never be brought back. The livelihoods lost are usually lost.
But the global north, along with the global south, can join hands, and do something once to alleviate to stop the effects of climate change from further exacerbating the social structure of all the different countries concerned, especially here. Even the global north is witnessing, as you yourself have said, the effects of climate change. Now, coming to the Petersburg dialogue, there was a lot of momentum that was generated by it. Do you feel COP28 that is happening in December this year, will we be able to see some concrete measures finally taking place, or do you feel it will be again pledges?
Well, going by history, pledges, but unless and until, because the thing is, all the commitments, all the pledges that are made, they are voluntary. Nobody can hold you to account. Even the NDCs are voluntary. So if somebody goes back on them, or somebody extends their, the net zero pledges have been pushed. The Ukraine war has sent the European countries scurrying to their coal mines again. So, I mean, these things are not static. They are not set in stone. It's just that how much pressure can be brought upon the countries whom we do know are responsible, who need to do more. It's always been a term that we have heard and we have had to deliver. But it's the countries that have within their hand the solution to a lot of climate disasters from stopping from them happening. They need to step up. The countries
therein lies the whole, how should I say, dichotomy of the situation. They need to step up, but are they stepping up? That is the huge question mark. This said, developing countries around the world can ramp up pressure as far as international climate commitments are concerned regarding the loss and damage fund, for which, of course, Sherry Rahman's contribution cannot be neglected. But this said, the global north is really not contributing towards this fund as we speak. How can we mobilize commitments to make that pledge for the Green Climate Fund's replenishment?
Okay, we are talking of two different things. Green Climate Fund is totally different from the loss and damage agreement. Loss and damage was something that was finally agreed to after a 30-year conversation. It was agreed to in the last COP. These things then now have to, they have to develop a mechanism. What is going to be the conduit? Who is going to receive? How are they going to apply for it? Similar to the manner of the very complicated mechanism that Green Climate Fund has. So that we cannot tap into just yet, because the mechanism will be developed and it will take a few years. So the first win was, of course, getting the acknowledgement that yes, the countries which are being suffering from damage need to be compensated. They need help. So we have to not start expecting anything coming from the loss and damage fund yet. It's just too soon. Maybe a few years down the road we can ramp up that pressure that they need to hurry up.
But Afia, you say a few years down the lane. Do we have a few years?
We don't know. Nobody knows that. Even they know. You see, the sense of urgency is sort of converging. You look at the IPCC report. You look at the agreement to the NDCs. They are not too old. They are just post Paris, which wasn't too many years ago. So I think that sense of urgency is converging into some actionable items. But it's just that In my personal opinion, I mean, even if I don't talk about the scientific evidence and the pressure from the scientific community, it needs to be fast tracked. We cannot wait to go, we call business as usual about the things that are being done. I think these to after getting an agreement, to put those agreement into action, that also cannot be on the same speed as business as usual.
You talk of business as usual, Afia, that brings me to mind Pakistan and it being devastated by the 2022 floods. Pakistan asking for the world to help it. We know about the pledges made during two United Nations led conferences, but of those pledges made, we have almost received a very small amount. Then Pakistan again asked at Geneva. We've talked about that as well. But why, if the world cannot help countries like Pakistan, what happens if tomorrow another country is affected by climate change? What happens if tomorrow a country in the global north is affected by climate change? I mean, is the world just going to leave these countries be as they are and let them, worsen their economic state of affairs, or should there be a collective effort?
Of course, there is to be a collective effort, because otherwise these mechanisms, or rather these agreements, would not have been there. But the whole point is, what I'm trying to make is that it's not fast enough, and whatever is being done is not enough. Or the pledges have not been met. The first step would be to meet the pledges. Because without that, the country's vulnerability will keep on increasing. They will not be resilient enough to bounce back from the kind of disasters. And any kind of country, I'm not only talking of Pakistan, any kind of country which is unraveling economically, and its social structure is damaged because of those economic shocks, which are because of these climate disasters, cannot bounce back. And any country in that state, the instability spills over to other parts of the world. So maybe that realization at the diplomatic level also needs to be ratcheted up, so that people realize that they need to come together, and they need to meet those pledges. And as far as the countries in the global north being hit by disasters right now obviously they haven't really extended an arm for help, because they do have the resources to deal with them. It's within those countries that that conversation needs to happen, that the pressure on their own governments for meeting the commitments, for getting an understanding of what climate change is and how they are actually contributing to climate change. I think that hasn't yet happened. Right now, the country I am in is a country which is seen as the country which emits the most. And when I see around me, I don't see that conversation happening in the streets. The realization that, it's going to come back and hit us. They've had these disasters, the storms, etc. But right now, it's not hitting the person in the street as much for it to generate the conversation within.
I really hope it ever happens, but maybe the only way that they will be able to make some proper action or take some proper action is when the person in the street will be affected by it. I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope the global north understands and comes to a mutual collective decision to help the global south, especially countries such as Pakistan that are extremely vulnerable to climate change despite being non-emitters. Thank you very much, Afia Salam, to have joined us. Afia, it's always a pleasure to have you on board. That was Afia Salam, environmentalist, talking to us about Pakistan and climate change and how it is now again being affected this year due to excessive rains, due to the cyclone Biparjoy that is going to hit the coastal areas. And of course, we will be updating you as far as the cyclone is concerned. Let's come to our second story that concerns Pakistan, Russia, their bilateral relationship, and the commitment that was made by the current government that the oil agreement will be made with Russia. It was made in April, and now the first oil tanker containing 45,000 metric tons of oil has docked at Pakistan's port. More in the following report.
Pakistan-Russia energy cooperation is blossoming as coalition government under the leadership of Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has fulfilled its promise of bringing crude oil from Russia. With Russia looking for new outlets for its crude oils and Pakistan looking for cheaper crude to overcome its balance of payment crisis, the deal serves both countries well. Both countries have made significant progress in the trade of petroleum products. First Russian discounted crude oil cargo has arrived in Karachi and will begin oil discharge on Monday. Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif has termed the arrival of the first ever Russian oil cargo to Pakistan Pakistan as the beginning of a new relationship between Islamabad and Moscow. Minister of State for Petroleum Musaddiq Malik, while announcing the agreement last month, stated that Pakistan's imports from Russia are expected to reach 100,000 barrels per day if the first transaction goes through smoothly. Russia had provided assistance to Pakistan by supplying wheat following last year's floods and offering discounts to support the flood victims. In a world with growing energy needs, Pak-Russia's energy cooperation is a welcoming step. The trade and political relations between Pakistan and Russia have witnessed significant improvement in recent years, and both countries are committed to bolster their ties.
Ahad Nazeer, who is the head of private sector engagement at the SDPI, joins us online. Ahad, thank you very much to have joined us. Ahad, Pakistan in April this year placed its first order for the discounted Russian crude oil under a deal that was struck between Moscow and Islamabad. The energy minister of the Russian Federation was here as well. And now a ship carrying crude oil from Russia at a discounted price has finally reached Karachi. Do you feel this is the beginning of a new chapter of the relationship between the two countries, and also a new chapter as far as Pakistan's energy vows are concerned, as far as the improvement is concerned?
Thank you. I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Thank you. I think by now all of us working on Pakistan's economy have realized that energy probably is the biggest problem that we face both at the supply and demand end. So this is of course a promising transformative step, as the Prime Minister also recognized it as, for both the energy security as well as the affordability of energy, which eventually gives us a lower cost of living as well as cost of doing business. Talking from the perspective of how this deal impacts the relationship between Islamabad and Moscow.
And also Pakistan's energy landscape. I think it's a very important day for Pakistan's landscape as well as far as the energy sector is concerned.
Exactly. So now we have a more diverse ways of getting the most component of our energy mix into Pakistan, and of course this can transform into the gas import as well from several other countries, not only Russia, but at least we have that constrained feeling that we had previously because of the inertia that we had to import only from the Arab countries. I think that sort of a constraint has been broken. And I think now Pakistan sits at a place where it can go beyond, go towards other sources of petroleum products as well.
I think it's an important decision that Pakistan made vis-a-vis Russia, and now that the first ship carrying the crude oil has docked at Karachi's port. I'd like to understand and refer to what our Minister for State for Petroleum Musaddiq Malik Saab said in April, that is a couple of months back, that Pakistan's import from Russia are expected to reach 100,000 barrels per day if the first transaction goes through smoothly. Now that the first ship has arrived, do you feel a new chapter begins as far as Pakistan's energy transformation is concerned, or also Pakistan energy ties with Russia are concerned?
So we have to look at it from a multiple sources of angle. Like talking about the short term, it will at least give us some relief on the diesel prices and HFO prices as well, which will translate into electricity costs. But if we talk about long term, we have to consider two bottlenecks that we have. Number one is the transportation and logistics. So usually the oil import that comes into Pakistan comes through UAE, which takes around 1,300 kilometers, and this vessel that was brought in from Russia almost had to travel 8,000 kilometers. So this actually increases, and these are experts talking, that the transportation cost will at least be 3 times higher. So this has to be included in the analysis. The other bottleneck that we have to consider is the bottleneck of refining this crude oil. So usually from the Arab states, we have a slightly lighter crude oil that is coming in, and that has different composition as well once it's refined, and our refineries also are adjusted to that particular type of oil. This oil that is coming in will have a different chemical configuration, and secondly, the refineries will have to adjust themselves to this. So I think the next few days are very important when this oil finally reaches the Pakistan Refinery Limited, and what type of quality, what type of.
Because of course the test report will be submitted in the next days as far as
Exactly.
the quality, yields, transportation costs and commercial viability of this crude oil is concerned. How important will that test report be as well in your point of view?
So at the moment, what the experts are suggesting is that the refining cost for this type of oil will be around $4 more than the usual oil that we import from Arab countries. And secondly, if we look at the composition also is a bit different. For example, if we talk about the oil imports from Arab countries, usually we have a 45% production of diesel and a 32% production of furnace, that 25% furnace oil. But from this, we are expecting a greater amount of furnace oil, which will be 50%, and 32% will be diesel. And of course, these are based on experts' opinion that we have had. I think the final report will signify whether these claims are true or not. So based on that, because our major requirement at the moment is more inclined towards diesel than HFO, because HFO is only 15% required for some of the power plants that are running. So I think in order to get the full feasibility of this deal in the long term, I think we will have to wait for the report to come out.
All right. Also, I'd like to understand how important is this deal, is the arrival of the cargo ship for our energy security?
Overall, I think it's a great step, because depending on one region or a few countries, for the sort of security that we require for energy, I think was not a good decision. This has eventually opened up a new avenue for us. And secondly, I think the experimentation with regards to using yuan as a currency instead of dollars, I think that is a
very interesting development as well. How important is this development? The payment mechanism that has been carved out using the yuan currency. Do you feel it will be productive for Pakistan in the long run?
So in the short run, I think it will not have a very significant impact, because we didn't have yuan at the moment. So we had to purchase yuan with the US dollar reserves that we had. But I think in the long run, because there are a lot of Chinese coming in, the Chinese companies working in Pakistan, and of course CPEC is also expected to go back to its original pace. So I think we can expect better results in the future based on using yuan as a currency instead of US dollar.
All right, Ahad, how optimistic are you as far as our energy landscape is concerned? We know that 30% of our oil is locally produced, refined by the local refineries, including Attak Refinery Limited. We have the Attak petrol stations also a lot across all of our country. But 70% of the crude oil is imported from the mostly from the Arab countries. Now, this is the first time that the crude oil has arrived from Russia. How do you foresee our energy landscape?
So majorly, I think the landscape does not look good because of the huge import dependence of the sector. And of course, this is a sector that impacts us all, whether we are as individuals as well as businesses and organizations. So I think, but this deal definitely has opened up a few new avenues which can help us develop better energy security, as well as I think there will be more control on energy prices at the Pakistanis end.
All right. What about Pakistan's oil consumption pattern? Do you feel, as you yourself have said, that there will be less of diesel that will be coming out of this crude oil and more of the other forms? Do you feel that will kind of put a positive impact as far as our current oil consumption pattern is concerned, or do you feel we'll be needing more of diesel from other sources?
Uh, I think, and that is why I'm very much looking forward to the report that comes out of PRL, because our HFO needs are very much tied up. One thing that I was, and this is just loud thinking, that we might have to look for some neighbors that are using HFO still, because a very few, almost 15% of the power plants are using HFO, and some of them are of course captive, and some of them are part of the IPP framework. So I think we might have to go for some additional sources for diesel, and this is probably one of the greatest risks involved with this transaction. The Russian oil usually has a significantly higher percentage of HFO than diesel involved.
All right. So, I mean, we will all be waiting for the report that will be coming in the next few days, and that will, of course, determine or ascertain as to how we move forward as far as that is concerned. Now, let's also talk about the price that we are getting the Russian crude oil for. It's around $50 to $52 per barrel against the price cap of $60 that had been imposed by the G7 countries. Do you feel this low cost, although it's not very low, but it's considerably low cost, will help resolve our balance of payment crisis? In your point of view, what's your take on that?
So in the short term, yes, it will help. But again, we have to consider the cost of transport as well as the cost of refinement. So considering that, I think the price might eventually be very close to 60 barrels, $60 per barrel. But still, I think one thing that can be done in the long run is that we can fix the price for a longer run with Russia, because Russia at the moment is also not enjoying a very good economic condition based on the sanctions. So I think this is an opportune time that we can strike a deal, a long-term deal with Russia, and we can probably cap a price based on quantity at a lower rate, and we can also look at some alternate routes for bringing in oil, including the Central Asia Regional Economic Corridor, CARIC, which is also which is a Asian Development Bank funded project, and the only bottleneck there is the 12-kilometer patch in Afghanistan due to security reasons. But I think this can probably be a very important aspect, because getting the Russian oil via road or rail through this Central Asia in the long run, of course, this will be a very long project, might eventually give us the type of competitive advantage that we require with getting oil partially from the Arab countries and from Russia.
Ahad, the world is changing, the geostrategic, geopolitical environment of the world is changing. With every passing month, we are seeing new alliances, new groups being formed. In this whole context, let's also look at the US State Department spokesperson's comment days after we had passed this deal with the Russian Federation, in which the spokesperson said that each country is going to make its own sovereign decisions as it relates to its energy supply, quote unquote. Does it mean or indicate that the US is not opposed to this deal between Pakistan and the Russian Federation?
I'll just answer because I'm not a diplomatic expert, but just based on the anecdotal evidence that we have, I think number one, that we had precedents. A similar deal was struck by India. So I think that is why US might not really have anything opposed to this deal. Secondly, I think at the moment there is a global recession. Every country is trying to secure their energy, and I think these big powers, especially in a pseudo mono polar world that we have, I think US also realizes that the energy needs of the country has to be met, and this also opens doors for import of gas from Iran, which I think can be a very important aspect here. But of course, just like you mentioned, there are alliances being developed. So I think China also will have a very important role to play here.
All right, thank you so very much, Ahad Nazeer, Head of Private Sector Engagement at the SDPI, joining us, telling us about the relationship that Pakistan and Russia have developed in the energy sector, and now with the first container that has arrived with the 45,000 metric tons of crude oil. Let's hope this relationship further deepens and that we get more and more crude oil and Pakistan energy wars are further ameliorated, and of course Pakistan comes out of this current energy situation that it is embroiled in. We'll end our show today with this, but before just going, I have to say 10 seconds about these 4 Colombian indigenous children that were discovered 40 days after their plane crashed in the Amazon jungle, surviving seeds by eating seeds, roots and plants. I'd like to quote what the National Organization of Indigenous Peoples of Colombia said: the survival of the children is a sign of the knowledge and relationship with the natural environment that is taught starting in the mother's womb. These are 4 siblings aged 13, 9 and 4, as well as now a 12-month-old baby that survived a plane crash on the 1st of May. You know, nature has sometimes ways that show miracles happening, and this is just one of them. With that, we come to an end of today's show. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with news story segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Till then, stay tuned to us. Allah Hafiz.